is believe and pray and trust God that even if it turns out completely the way you don't want it to, that He's going to take care of you and He will show up. If He tells you something, believe Him.
What did He tell you?
And He told me to step out on faith. Step out on faith and celebrate your healing, not knowing you're healed at this point. Step out there and do it.
For most of the world, the year 2020 brought challenges we'd never known before. For Julie Smith, 2020 brought staggering adversity that would challenge her faith and dramatically reshape the rest of her life. Today, she shares the story of her survival, and I believe her rebirth through faith, community, and the unmistakable presence of God. Welcome to A Stronger Faith, a podcast that gives you a front row seat as everyday people share real experiences that change their faith. I'm Stacy McCants, and we pray that God uses this conversation to move you in your pursuit of a stronger faith. Today, Julie Smith joins us because she cannot help but share the story of how God continues to move in her life. We need more people like Julie who are willing to share their experiences for the kingdom of God. If you feel like you have an experience that could somehow help others in their faith, or if you know of someone else with a great faith-shaping story, please send a quick email to connect@astrongerfaith.com or reach out to us on Facebook or Instagram. And now, Julie has a story of adversity and faith that you need to hear. God will speak to you through this conversation if you'll let Him. Let's meet Julie. Like most conversations I have where we're sharing faith experiences and things that shaped our lives, I met you through a mutual friend. And turns out when we talked and I kind of looked you up on social media, we probably have like 50 some odd shared friends. You're from my neck of the woods, and like my mom is mutual friends with you, and God bless you, part of a good chunk of my family, and sorry about that.
No, you have a great family. It's a wonderful legacy.
I feel like I can pick on them a little bit because I love them so much. Growing up in the south part of the state, in that small town, I had the good fortune of having both sides of my family from down there. So on any random Saturday or Sunday afternoon, I was gathered with all my cousins, or most of my cousins, at some grandparents' house, or some of them lived right down the street, or I'd spend the night at both sides of the family. And so all of us grew up in the same town on both sides of my family, which I know now is rare. I just thought that's how life was. So no, you're right. I have a great family, and I like to pick on them as much as I can here because they can't say anything back to me primarily. Well,
we tell people in our family that if we're not picking on you, that means we don't like you. You need to be concerned.
You've done something to make us mad.
We like to be fun.
That's right. That's right. But so we have a mutual friend, and my wife walk together a lot, and they were talking about the podcast, and she said, "Hey, I've got somebody that really would be great if she'll do this." Her name is Julie Smith, and friends of the family and known each other for our whole lives, really. So we kind of connected that way, and I remember our initial call. It basically was, people complain about 2020, and it's primarily around the fact that coronavirus disrupted everyone's lives. That's a small piece of what happened in your 2020.
That's safe to say.
Yeah. And so it seemed like, in talking to you, that it was this series of things that happened in 2020 that, quite frankly, would be a challenge for anyone to come out on the other side into 2021 with a lot of A, sanity,
That's fair.
B, confidence. I think it would be safe to say that it would be a spiritual challenge such that you were forced to grow.
Very much so.
In your faith. And knowing you and what I know of you now, and just talking to people that know you, this didn't bring you to faith.
No.
We were just talking earlier as you came in, the fact that, you've taught multiple generations now Sunday school at your church.
Absolutely.
So your background of faith is not something that is new. What really is your background?
I guess my background is I grew up in the church. I remember going to church and participating in church and loving it, but it was something we did. And we were fortunate enough in our generation that it was just something you did.
Yeah.
But I remember God becoming very personal to me when I got married. And it was important to me. I'm thankful now that it was very important to me to choose someone to date that had a faith similar to mine, so we could build a life together built on faith. And that, in hindsight, was one of my best decisions I ever made, second to salvation, I think, is to build a strong partnership for life with someone that's a good Christian as well, that's a strong Christian man, because he's been such a blessing and such a huge part of my story. And we were able to get through this together, because sometimes I lean on him, sometimes he leans on me. So, but I remember being very real. We were talking about children earlier. I remember getting on my knees by my toilet in my bathroom one night and saying, Lord, I just can't do this by myself anymore. I've got to have you for everything. I cannot take care of 2 small children and work full time and be a nurse and be a wife without you. I have to have you for everything. And that's when my walk, when my relationship turned to, I'll talk to the Lord all day, every day. I don't just pray a certain given time in a prayer closet. I talk to God all day. He's like my personal friend. He's there for me. He's not like somebody, this nebulous being in heaven. So that, and then we grew up and we raised our children in church, to the point that sometimes being criticized by even, parents about being overly involved. You do too much with your children. You take them to church too much. They need to rest sometimes, whatever. But that was very important to us. And I feel like that's a huge part of our story today, is that we raised our children that way.
So when you entered into some of the challenges that hit you in 2020, you feel like your foundation was probably in a pretty good spot.
I do. I feel like, I teach Sunday school. I taught adult Sunday school for many years, and then we stepped into teaching Sunday school with teenagers, not per se teaching our children, but teaching in the department while they were teenagers. Now, I did teach our daughter 1 year, but she asked us to, because she felt like we were fun, quote unquote.
That's a rare thing for a teenage girl to say about her parents.
We did teach her 1 year. But,
you were doing something right.
I hope so. But I've taught Sunday school forever. I've discipled young women, and we're just very involved. So it was not that we didn't already have faith. It was that God was ready to take us to a deeper level.
Yeah, and sort of enter 2020, and I guess what happened there, I think from my understanding, the first thing was sort of a health challenge that you felt like was one thing that turned into something a lot more serious.
Absolutely. To say it as delicately as possible, I went into 2020 from the last week of 2019, knowing that I was scheduling routine hemorrhoid surgery, which is a bit embarrassing to talk about and a very indelicate situation. And, was apprehensive about it, but hated to even ask people to pray, because it's a sensitive, uncomfortable, awkward conversation to have with people.
Sure.
But I did, the Sunday night before I had it, I did open up to my discipleship training class, which is other women, and say, guys, I'm having the surgery, and I'm having it tomorrow, and I need you guys to pray for me. And so I went into the surgery, had the surgery. Then a week later, I went back for a follow-up just to get a return to work. The doctor had said, if you'll just come down, if you feel like it, at a week, just come in, and I'll work you in. And if you're doing really good, then I'll give you a return to work, and I'll tell you what you need to do. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. So I did that. I had my sister-in-law drive me down, and we got there, and we waited and waited and waited, and he came in. And I thought, well, he's got an odd look on his face. And being a nurse, you're kind of sensitive to that. And he sat down, and he was very, very kind. He looked me dead in the eye and he said, Miss Smith, you remember that I told you that we were going to send the hemorrhoid off for pathology? And I said, yes, sir, I do. And he said, that was just routine. He said, but unfortunately, it came back with a melanoma. And I just broke into a cold sweat. Melanoma is a cancer. And I kind of blanked out for a second. I was kind of zoned for just a minute. And then I took a deep breath and he said, I really don't know what to say. And I looked at him, I said, well, God is bigger. It's okay. Thank you for being kind about it. But God is bigger, and what do we do from here? And so he referred me immediately to an oncology group upstairs, actually, and he got me in that day. So I had to call my husband and tell him over the phone that I needed him to come down there and get it there as soon as possible. And I had to have my sister-in-law come out of the waiting room, and I had to tell her that, hey, this is what's going on. So we went upstairs and they said, we'll get things rolling. Well, I had a conversation with actually the head of the oncology group that I think a lot of, that is someone that I professionally think a lot of, Dr. Michael Mishad in Mobile. And he came in and he sat down and we had a conversation, and I don't remember all of it, but he said, you know what, Miss Smith, you have options now. Used to, I would just say go home. But we have options, and we've been treating people for about 10 years now. And he said, I've got people 10 years out with multiple sites. And I was like, well, that's what I want to hear. So I remember going home and crying on the way home, and just really, you just feel that blanket of darkness, that heaviness, that spiritual oppression just kind of hovering over you, and my husband and I are trying to talk, and we're praying, and we decide, okay, the first thing we've got to do is we've got to tell our children. Well, no matter what age they are, that's very hard to do. And so we called our son that night. It was the night of the national championship game. We called him that night, and then we weren't able to get our daughter until the next day. So we called our daughter. Our daughter saw the message and then called us back early the next morning. And frankly, one of the questions that you asked me is how I absorbed the diagnosis. Well, I had to call my parents. I went to my parents' house and I told them, and that was incredibly hard as well. But I'm very fortunate. My mom is one of my biggest prayer warriors and one of the strongest people of faith in my life. And she came over the next day to just babysit me, honestly, because I just kind of went into a funk. I just had the surgery, like I said, and I just kind of laid on the couch that day. I had cried until my eyes were swollen. Well, we live in Leroy, and so we don't always lock our door. And I know there's some logical explanation for this, but I'm not sure what it was. On my table, I discovered a gift that someone had left me. And I got up that morning after my husband left to go to work, and I opened that gift. And it was a little ceramic cross called a clinging cross. And it's one that is specially ergonomically fashioned to fit in your hand for you literally to cling to it. And I opened it, and I didn't even know who it was from. I didn't have any idea how it got in my house, who it was from, anything. And so I laid there and I literally cried and prayed, and I held that cross all day long. And so we absorbed telling everyone that we needed to tell immediately. We talked to our pastor, talked to our youth minister. We're incredibly close to him since we share his ministry with him. He lets us, teach and do ministry with him, with our youth at our church. And so I just remember being I honestly am embarrassed that I just let it completely overwhelm me. I'm praying. I've got people praying, it's just crazy. But on Thursday morning, I wake up and I got a book, and you asked me about books. I don't even remember which book it came from. But I picked up the book and I read it, and it said, do you really want to be healed? And I thought, well, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Who wouldn't want to be healed? But it said, you got to get up. Basically, it was like, suck it up. Get up. Don't lay here and feel sorry for yourself. Don't enjoy the attention. Don't give in to the nausea if you're nauseated. Don't give in to the pain if you're in pain. You got to get up and you got to keep pushing. And I thought, you know what? I do. And I got up and I got ready and I put my nursing uniform on and I took a selfie and I sent it to my kids and my husband and my mom and my pastor, my youth pastor. And I said, I've decided today I'm not the patient yet. I'm still the nurse. I'm headed to work. Pray for me. And so I went in and I talked to my staff. I have a great staff. We pray together. One of the most contagious people that I ever have known as a Christian works with me. And we prayed. I told them, and we all held hands, and they prayed for me that day. And things started to move from that point.
It is normal and natural for us when we get news that is difficult, there's a process we have to kind of go through, I think, where we mourn.
Yes.
Right? Because when you hear news like that, it's like you've been cut, right?
Right.
And when you get cut, you bleed, and you don't need to go carry on as normal the moment you get cut. You need to kind of stop the bleeding, right? You need to kind of take a minute. And I know that it is natural also for us to, when we have things that we believe might result in our fate, to have this overwhelming sense of sadness.
Yes.
Maybe a little depression.
Absolutely.
Because you think you've just been handed a death sentence.
Correct.
And you can't digest that super quickly. I think that's a real important piece of any of this. And I also believe that God reminds us that we absolutely have to have him.
Absolutely.
Because when you look at things like in Scripture, just think about the Exodus, right? So when they were making their way out in the Exodus, God led them to a point where there was no way out. Their back was against the Red Sea. There was no place to go, and the Egyptian army, it was bearing down on them. That was their death. They saw it coming. There was nothing they could do. The only thing they could do was ask God to save them. There was nothing that they could do. They couldn't create a bridge or a path. There's nothing they could do. I feel like we get those situations, and if we will value the place that we are at and say, you know what? I can't do anything about this. If something is to happen, it must be you, God.
Absolutely.
And it feels like I was in a similar situation. It wasn't a cancer diagnosis. I had a heart attack. 46.
Game changer.
And as far as I knew, that was I just been given my death sentence. And I came home with that sense of depression. And I understand that. And I think it's powerful, and I think it's a tool that God uses for us to be reminded that we will be confronted with many things that we can't handle. And he is God, and he's the only one that can do it. And so when I envision you during this time absorbing that and being on the couch and crying and all the things go with it, that is no sign of weakness. It's a sign of weakness that we need to have, right? Weakness in the face of God, in letting him be strength.
Yes.
I think we deceive ourselves into thinking that we're the ones that are powerful. And,
right.
And that doesn't mean that you can't have a good, strong character and all the other things that come with that. But I think it's a reminder, especially to strong people, that there are things that you're going to encounter that you must lean on him.
And I think that's a huge part of this. Absolutely. And I'm being convicted in this conversation for the first time that when I made that decision that morning to get up and be the nurse and not the patient that day, that's when I said, okay, God, we're going to do this together. You can, whatever it is, whatever it looks like, whatever I have to go through, however it ends, we're going to do this. But I'm not going to take it laying down. You and I, you're going to get me through this, just like you've got me through everything else in my life. It's go time. I'm not just going to lay here. But I had to decide that. And from that point, I'm telling you, big miracles, little miracles, they all started happening. That weekend, I got a text. Well, first I think I got a text from a youth minister, a former youth minister that we were very, very close to, that really introduced us to Christian music, which is a huge part of this testimony for me, is Christian music and surrounding yourself with Christian music. And Kevin sent me hey, have you heard this song? And it was Waymaker. And then my daughter was like, hey, Mom, I've been listening to praise songs. It was like the very next day. Have you heard this song? It's Waymaker. And she called her best friend that used to be her roommate that lived in Baldwin County, and my daughter lives here in Tuscaloosa. And she was crying out to her for support. My mom's going through this. And I have a relationship with that young lady too. Such a blessing, such a blessing. And she was like, hey, you need to tell your mom about this new song, Waymaker. So that the Lord gave us that song like immediately. Well, our church was rolling into revival, and we're a Baptist church. We're a Southern Baptist church, traditional services. And we go into a revival, and the first song, the first night, Waymaker. And I'm like, wow. I'd never heard this weekend, this story before, this song before now. And here it is, the first service. And we sang it just about every night. Well, I had to miss one day of our revival to go to the Mayo because I already had a lung condition that I had been diagnosed with a year before. And I had a doctor at the Mayo. And when I saw Dr. Mishad, the oncologist in Mobile, he said, the surgeon downstairs made the comment that you would like to be referred somewhere. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, I see that you're already a patient at the Mayo. And I said, yes, sir, I am. And he said, honey, I would go to the Mayo if I were you. And I said, well, are you going to be offended by that? And he said, absolutely not. Go. It's a tertiary hospital. It's a specialty hospital. Take your lungs and your colon to the same spot, honey. And I laughed. And I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. Well, I had this appointment already with a pulmonologist, and I go and I sit down with her, and I have all these people praying for me, the people of Leroy, the family that you're talking about, your friend, her parents, everybody's praying for me. They're all texting me. I said, my husband's chairman of deacons. We know everybody in the church, and everybody's being amazing. We live in a very pastoral, amazing, praying, faith-filled community, and they're all praying for me, and they're texting me, and we have to miss a night of revival to go down there. And I tell her, I give her my report, and I'm like, look, I need an oncology referral. I'm already in your system, but I'm not in your system till March. But I really need to know if you can pull strings. And she looked down at my report and she was like, wait a minute, we have a melanoma specialist. I need to talk to him. So she types out a text to him immediately. And while we're sitting there, he texts her back. And my plan begins. And before I even had my original consult set up, I had already had my surgery and was already in my plan of care at the Mayo. It's amazing how the Lord moved. But we came back to that revival. And if you don't think this is a miracle, think about it now. I told my husband, I said, I'm loving this revival, and we missed a night. I just prayed. I just asked God if it would extend one night, and it did. We had an extra night of revival. That doesn't happen in Southern Baptist churches.
Those things are pretty scheduled.
Yeah, they go Sunday through Wednesday. Well, we went an extra night. We went on a Thursday night, and it was incredible. It was just very, very good. And it led right into a D-Now weekend that we were already a part of. And I had to stand up and tell my kids, we call them our kids, I had to tell our kids that what I was going through. And it was real important to me because 2 of them lost their moms to cancer. And I was professionally a part of that experience for both of them. So,
as a nurse? As
a nurse, yes. I was involved in the end of life for both their moms.
Wow.
So I really wanted them to see that I was okay, that I have it, but I'm okay. We're going to walk through this openly with you guys, and I appreciate your prayers, but I want you to hear it from me. I don't want you to hear it from somebody else, and it was really hard for me also. But I want you to know that we're okay, and they responded hugely. They have prayed for me. They've been my rock as much as the adults have. It's phenomenal. That's all a part of the miracle also. But we go down and we meet the surgeon before I ever even meet my oncologist. And I'm thinking, okay, in Mobile they told me we may have to do a colostomy. Well, that's my biggest, worst fear. My secret horror all my nursing career has been to have a colostomy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm going to go to the Mayo, and they're going to say, honey, that's kind of a thing of the past. We can do this, this, and this now. Well, I go down and we meet with the surgeon, and I come back and he tells us, we're going to meet. We'll all sit down together, your whole team, and we'll make a decision. And this was on a Monday. And he said, if we don't have your case, all your tests together by Wednesday, it'll be the next Wednesday. So that Wednesday morning, I pull into my office, and I get there an hour before everybody else. And I get a phone call as I pull it in, and it's that 905 number, so I know it's the Mayo. And it was Dr. Tuscaloosa, my surgeon. And he said, Ms. Smith, what the tumor board has met, and I'm afraid to tell you you're going to have a colostomy. And my world just kind of sunk again. And I turned around, and I just thought, I can't digest this in front of people. I can't process it. And I went home, and I texted him, and my boss, and he's amazing. And I said, I can't do it. I got to have a colostomy, and I just need to go home and absorb it today. And I promise I'll be back tomorrow. Went back home, grabbed my cross, sobbing, crying, praying, Lord, I need to get over this. I know I need to get over this, but this is my worst horror coming to life. And I have a young Christian young lady that I walked through some difficult times with. We prayed for each other through some hard times. And she just happened to call me. She just said the Lord just laid it on her heart to call me. And I thought, well, I'm going to answer her. And I just fell apart. I'm like, well, Jennifer, my husband's going to think this is horrible. I'm not going to be, we're all about the beach. We're all about swimming. We have a pool in our backyard, It's going to smell. It's going to be terrible. It's this big, bulky, awful thing, and I'm a professional, and people are going to be able to tell this is just horrible. My husband and I work out 4 days a week in a high-intensity interval training class. And we walk. We're just very active, healthy-oriented people, and this is going to be the end of all that. And bless her heart, I hung up, and she said, I'm coming over. And I said, no, don't. I'm just laying here. Just don't come over. Well, she came. And she had researched all of the things that I had whined about to tell me they were all going to be okay. It was amazing. I'm thinking, okay, thank you. We looked at some things. And so my husband came home and he reassured me, I married you. It's fine. I think you're beautiful. It's okay. We're going to get through this. It's going to be fine. Technology's different. And the surgery, it's set for the surgery. And went back and forth to the Mayo several times to get things taken care of, to get things mapped out for the surgery. Now, bear in mind, this is right before COVID.
Yeah, I'm wondering, timeline-wise, when did you find out? When was the diagnosis?
My diagnosis was January the 14th.
So right away. Talking about 2020, you've got the whole year covered.
My hemorrhoid surgery was the 7th. My diagnosis was the 14th. And I can't remember the exact day in January. It was at the end of January that we had revival and that I had started all my appointments, because the appointments, boy, they just sped up at that point. So I was back and forth to Jacksonville a lot after that.
So you had the initial surgery before you had the diagnosis, but then there was the surgery.
Then I had the big surgery. And I had
when was that?
Big surgery February the 19th. Okay. So it was right before COVID, which is amazing because my surgery was 8.5 hours long. And my husband had amazing support. My children all came. Their spouse came. One spouse didn't get to come. The other spouse did. Our pastor and his wife drove all the way down there. My parents came down. My brother and his wife came down. My husband's brother and his wife came down. We're best friends. We're brother-in-law and sister-in-law, but they're pretty much our best friends. They came down. My niece came down. I have a friend that's a nurse that I gave chemo when she was 29. And she's about 51 or so now. And she had colon cancer when she was 29. And I got certified in chemo to give her chemo at home. We kind of talked the doctors into it to give part of her chemo at home. And so we knew that I was going to have wound vacs. And somebody was going to have to know how to take my wound vacs off. So she said, hey, you were there for me. I'm going to be there for you. So Samantha drove all the way down there to meet with the ostomy nurse and the wound vac nurses to be the backup for home health when I came home, because the surgery was so big.
Yeah.
So they took out part of my colon and all of my rectum. So that entails quite a bit, and then created the colostomy. So there was a lot going on there.
Yeah.
8.5 hours long. They took out lymph nodes. Only had one lymph node that was involved. They got all of it. And so that was great. That was what we expected from the get-go. And had the surgery done. And the crazy thing is, to this day, I never felt sick. I was well when they found it. The hemorrhoid saved my life. I can look at it other ways, but the truth is the fact that I had a hemorrhoid and I chose to pursue and push, and I had to push to get in to see the doctor. And I had to go against one doctor telling me that I didn't need to have any kind of procedure at the time because I was on steroid treatment for my lungs. And he didn't know if my wound would heal well. But I was like, I want to get this taken care of. This is bad. And thank goodness, I prayed about that also. I'm like, Lord, if I need to keep pushing this doctor to get this doctor that I want, then let me do this. Help me do this. Help me be brave enough to do this, because I'm not a real confrontational person. But I kept pushing them until I got to see the doctor early also. So that was another huge answer to prayer. But where I never felt bad. I was well the whole time. When I woke up, I thought that I would be, I walked the next day. And when I look at pictures now, it wasn't pretty, but I walked. I had the wound vacs. I had an IV. I had an epidural, but I walked the whole time. I started walking day one and post-op, and I walked every day. And I just didn't feel bad. I didn't have a lot of pain, and I just didn't feel bad. I mean, God was just with me every step. When the kids had to come home, our best friends came down. Well, that was another miracle. As indelicately as I can phrase this, all those muscles back there that involve your rectal area are strong muscles, and so they sew you shut with fishing wire. Well, that meant, how am I going to get home from the Mayo if I can't sit up because I'm sewn up with fishing wire? And I have these wound vacs. So we were put in contact with Pilots for Christ, an organization that flies people. It's a faith-based organization in Monroeville, Alabama, that flies people for medical treatment. So I put an application into them, and I was approved. Well, they work with Power South. And our other best friends that had moved several years ago, he's a director at Power South. Well, he and his wife they're our prayer partners, and they did youth ministry with us till they moved. And they were wonderful. The day the kids left, they drove down to spend the night. And Brian's a fixer, and Brian was going to check us into a motel, make sure that we got on Pilots for Christ on Sunday. I was going to be discharged from the hospital on Saturday. And I couldn't get my Pilots for Christ flight until Sunday. So I was going to have to go to a motel, and I was nervous about that. I was like, okay, how am I going to navigate, and all this is going on in my wound vacs, and the people are going to look at me and say, you need to go back to the hospital, lady. So we're headed down to check out that day to go to the motel, and we walk down because I can't sit in a wheelchair. They walk me down, and the nurse walks down with me. She was a very wonderful nurse. She walked down with me so I could go ahead and leave, and he had pulled under the front door, under the ramp at the front door to pick us up. And he was talking on the phone, and his wife was kind of giving him that stern look like, Brian, this is not the time to be working. We're picking David and Julie up from the hospital. And he's like, just a minute. And so we get me in the back seat, and I'm kind of, trying to figure out how to navigate sitting somewhat. And he turns around and he said, guys, you're not going to believe this. He said, I'm talking to the pilot that's on Pilots for Christ, and everything got mixed up. And if we can have you at the airport in 30 minutes, you can fly home today.
Wow. Man, that's a huge blessing.
I mean, that's just God.
Yeah, it is.
So we drive across the parking lot, and they give him the coordinates, and he puts it in his GPS, and we drive to the airport. Now, the thing that you understand about Leroy, that people listening don't understand about Leroy.
I do know Leroy.
Is it does not have a red light. And on any given weekend, we may be down a few stop signs because some of our youth may need a little extra entertainment and have run over them the night before. But we certainly don't have an airport.
I know nothing about that.
Right. So there's just not enough to do in the country sometimes. But there is a small private airstrip that not very many people know about in Chatham. And these guys flew me to Chatham. So my husband and I get on a plane. We have time to make one phone call. We call my son and say, call my daughter, call my parents, tell them I'm on the way home. Call your Uncle Ron and Aunt Donna and tell them we're in the air.
You guys, Mayo's in Jacksonville,
Florida.
That's
correct.
Right. So you were going to have to stay there for a day or two.
Right.
Waiting your turn.
For Pilots for Christ.
And suddenly, as you're getting in the car, it's a reroute from the hotel or from the place instead of the hotel straight to the airport.
Straight to the airport.
And in a few hours, you're home.
In 2 hours, I'm home.
Man, that's unbelievable.
I'm home, and my nephew drives my Yukon there to pick us up so I can lay back.
Yeah.
He gives me a recliner to sit in. He brings a recliner to my house and puts me in the recliner. I mean, it's just amazing. So it's just crazy.
This is middle of February, right?
This is middle of February.
So in 6 weeks' time, you've gone from nothing really to this.
To full-blown treatment.
Yeah.
Surgery, to full-blown, depending on other people. And like you said, I'm that strong person, and this is what God was working on me. I have too much pride.
Yeah.
Really too hard-headed and really too independent. And I thought, okay, I'm teaching Sunday school. I'm a deacon's wife. I work with the youth. I do this. I do that. I'm the manager at work. I work hard. I take calls 7 days a week. They can't do without me. I'm indispensable. I'm there for my kids. I'm there for my I've got a grandchild on the way. I'm just like, I can strong-willed person, very strong-willed person, to suddenly I can't do anything.
Yeah, pushing your way through to in any situation. To having to be led and to follow and have someone else take the wheel.
So we fast forward a little bit, and I remember my boss visiting me one night. Came to see me. We spent some time together, and we both, ironically and ignorantly, laughed about COVID and said it's not going to be what everybody thinks it is. That's key. We both underestimated COVID at that point, and we both said, it's going to be like flu. We're both overly optimistic persons too many times. So fast forward a little bit, I leave. It comes time for my radiation. They call me and say, we want you to have 4 weeks of radiation. So we find a place for me to stay. Now, in my mind, I'm going to go down. I'm going to leave on Sunday afternoon. I'm going to drive to Jacksonville. I'm going to stay till Friday morning. The minute my radiation treatment's over, I'm coming back to Leroy. So I'm kind of telling myself this commuting, and then COVID hits.
This is right in the middle of
Literally.
March, early middle March.
Literally, COVID hits. I can remember being so anxious, and that spirit of depression hanging over me again. I don't know what I'm getting into. I got to go down here. The rules have changed. My mom can't be one of my caretakers anymore. I have to have a caretaker. My mom can't stay with me because the governor of Florida says nobody over 70 can be out and about. I remember
that, yeah.
Okay, my daughter's pregnant with our first grandchild. Her doctor says, no way, Jose, you're not traveling. Okay, so there go 2 of my caregivers right off the bat. My brother and his wife volunteered to come. Their daughter is OT, so she was high risk. She was living with them. She's in and out of the hospital. My sister-in-law's a teacher. That puts her higher risk. So I'm like, okay, they're probably, I love them, but that's scary for me. So I don't need to be exposed to someone that's high risk at COVID right now. So my daughter-in-law stepped up, and she came and stayed 2 weeks. So, I mean, gosh, that was just a huge blessing. Who wants to stay with their mother-in-law for 2 weeks? But she's an angel. It was wonderful. But I can remember driving to Birmingham, and this is the ironic thing. You asked me about miracles and supernatural stuff. 1 year ago today is the day that I left going to radiation.
Really?
1 year ago today.
Today. Now you're telling the story about it.
Today I have a testimony.
Yeah.
I'm sharing my testimony. And 1 year ago today, I was terrified. We were scared. I can't describe the emptiness of I-10 from Birmingham. We came up and left from Birmingham to make it easier for her as we drove. We didn't want to stop at gas stations because you didn't want to be around people. I can remember.
Yeah, the world changed pretty quickly.
The world changed. The world shut down that weekend.
And you're about to go into treatment, radiation, which is going to make you
immunocompromised.
Much more compromised.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes, and I already have a pre-existing lung condition.
That's right.
At this point. So we're going into it with all this. And honestly, being a nurse, I always looked at the Mayo Clinic as like, oh man, I'd love to work there. But when I faced the Mayo Clinic as a patient, I'm like, oh God, you got to get me through this.
Yeah.
I'm at the Mayo. I'm not in Mobile. I'm not at Washington County Hospital where I'm on the hospital board.
You didn't sprain your ankle to get to the Mayo.
Right. I'm a patient of the Mayo. This is terrifying. And the Mayo is a hugely busy place. It's always just like frantic. I mean, there are international patients, there are interpreters, healthcare people everywhere, maintenance people everywhere. That day there was nobody.
Yeah.
It was just empty. Screening changed every day that week. They went to workforce reduction. So my radiation team changed every day. Everything changed every day. I was terrified. They were terrified. I could tell by the looks on their faces they were as terrified as the patients were.
Well, you're terrified because you're battling, for your life with this melanoma, and now you've layered on this other thing that's got everybody else.
And I'm literally in this fight by myself again. Yeah. All my support system. I mean, Megan's there and she's amazing, but the normal support system that I would have is gone. Like I said, I'm back to just God. It's just me and you, God. And
so during all this, you have been on a physiological and spiritual and emotional roller coaster
Yes.
to the extreme in a
Yes.
2-month window here, essentially. You think about early mid-January to now you're in early mid-March,
Yes.
right? That's a couple of months, give or take a week or two. How has your spiritual life changed? How's your prayer life changed? I mean, and when I say roller coaster, I don't know how many highs you had on that roller coaster. It seems like you were in the bottom of that thing for a while. You were already strong spiritually, mature spiritually. How did it even heighten more? How did it change?
I honestly, those 2 lows that I told you about, those 2 days, the day that Dr. C called and the day that I got my diagnosis, were the only 2 days that I really didn't have this supernatural peace. I mean, I really had a supernatural peace.
Really?
I can't describe it any other way than I had a supernatural peace.
Did that come on its own, or did you find yourself in longer, more intense prayer? Were you in Scripture more? How did you?
I'm definitely in Scripture and prayer more, but I'm in more spiritual warfare mode. The minute that I feel Satan throw a dart of worry into my brain,
Yeah.
like this is going to happen, and this is what radiation is going to be, and and I'm a nurse. I work very closely with an inpatient hospice in Mobile. I know what end of life looks like. You're going to be that person that's on a pain pump that they're trying to figure out how to get all this nausea under control. And I just start praying immediately, like, get away from me, Satan. Just get away. And I just start singing some kind of contemporary Christian song. At that point, I'm clinging to Waymaker, and I'm clinging to I'm going to see a victory.
Some people would think that that's like burying reality. And when I hear you say that, and I think about that, I don't really interpret it as that. I don't see that as just like I'm just going to bury this and trick myself into thinking something positive so that I don't have to experience this emotional load that's depressing.
No, you got to fight. To me, that was my weapon. Spiritual, I'm not great at memorizing Scripture, but I'm really good at singing the songs on the Message and on Christian radio.
Yeah.
And I'm going to see a victory says the weapon may be formed, but it won't prosper. Satan had a weapon out there, but that didn't mean he had to win with it. And I can't let the battle get in my mind, because if you're a cancer patient, the battle is fear and it's in your mind. And if I let myself get going with that, I'm lost. I'm sinking.
Yeah.
So I got to fight up front. I got to start singing. I got to turn the radio up. I got to start singing. I got to pray. And God always gave me somebody that sent me a card. I have learned the importance of sending the card, the physical card in the mail. The texts are great, but the physical card in the mail is amazing also. And people were wonderful about that. I mean, wonderful about that. I have one lady that texts me every doctor's appointment, and I finally asked her, how do you remember that? And it was so simple. She said, I set an alarm on my calendar, and I get an alert that morning, and she would text me at that day. And I do that now. That is a very practical way to be an encourager to somebody. When I know somebody's got something coming up, when I know another cancer patient that's fixing to go through a scan, I set an alarm on my calendar for that day. So I remember to pray for them, and I remember to text them, I know you have anxiety today, and I'm praying for you.
Yeah, episode 1 is a friend of mine. His name is Justin Smith, and he was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer that spread into his liver, 37 years old. And I've just known him for a long time, and I know the kind of guy he is. And but I was struck with, it was a very similar thing that he said. It was, he just never allowed an ounce of negativity to take root anywhere. I mean, the doctor was going to tell him like the percentages and all that stuff of survival. And he's like, do not tell me anything. I don't want to know anything other than what we're going to do going forward. Now, he's a man of great faith, and his faith really carried and still carries him in all he does. But it was a very similar thing in that it was like his own, like you say, it was like a spiritual warfare. It was a battle, and it was, in no way am I going to let the enemy of my survival get a foothold in any place. And that's what he did. It sounds really similar so when I think that people would say, yeah, that's just a mechanism to cope, right? And you're just kind of burying something down in there and not really facing reality. I don't see it as that. And when I watch you describe it, I don't even, that's not even close to what I feel like you're actually saying.
Yeah.
And that's really I think that's a powerful message. I think that's a spiritual truth, right? Jesus always said several times, hey, your faith has made you well. I think that's what he's talking about.
And there's not times that you won't stumble. I mean, I made it into week 4. I have in front of me to remind me, my daughter wrote me, since she couldn't be there, and she's such a strong Christian young lady, I'm so proud of her. She wrote me a scripture for every day and a prayer and put them in an envelope. So I had 20 envelopes in a beautiful box.
Oh, that's awesome.
Every single day. Since she couldn't be there, I had one for every day. My daughter-in-law made me, I'm a short-term goal-oriented person. She made me a paper chain, and every day when I finished radiation, I cut one of the links off. So it's just like a visible, I've made it another day, you know.
No, that's great.
They did these things for me, you know, so it's things that helped me so much. But week 4, we were planning for me to come home. I had planned this big Facebook celebration in my mind. You know, this is God and I were having this victory. It's week 4. And my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law are there with me. And I find a lump in the area that I'd had the surgery. And I just wilted again.
So you were supposed to get radiation for 4 weeks. And so this is the end of that.
This is the 4th week. And so I'm in my 4th week planning my celebration in my mind. Yeah. And I find a lump. So I go in the next day for my radiation, and I fall apart to my radiation tech. Now, I did forget to say this today, but I said this to you before. You know Leroy, and you noticed that little spot. I was terrified on day 1. And when I went in, the song that was singing in my head was, "There's another in the fire." And I remembered, you know, Lord, just like Daniel, you're going to be with me. There's another in the fire. But you called it a God wink on our conversation that day, and I like that. When I got in there that day, I had the sweetest little redheaded radiation technician, and she's talking to me, and they're making me feel comfortable, and they were fantastic. They really were. And she was like, "Where are you from?" And I was like, "Well, you're not going to know where I'm from. I'm from Alabama." "Well, where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Leroy." She said, "Well, you know, I know where that is." I said, "No, you don't." She said, "Yes, I do. I used to be engaged to somebody from Jackson." And we talked about it, and yes, she did indeed know where Leroy's from. And we had a connection. I knew exactly who she had been engaged to and knew the family, and we agreed what a great family they were. But I thought, thank you, God. You know, you made me comfortable on day 1. You gave me a connection to Leroy to know that you have ordered my steps, and you have put me at Mayo, and you have put this young lady at the Mayo, and our paths have crossed for a reason. And thank you that she made me comfortable today. Week 4, she encouraged me. She's like, "Oh, Miss Julie, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I promise, Miss Julie, it's going to be fine." And I'm thinking, you really shouldn't promise that. I'm the nurse, you know. I'm thinking that. And the radiologist sees me, and he says, "Okay, we're going to have to get a biopsy, but I feel like it's fine." So I call my husband, and I fall apart. And he was planning to come down on Thursday and drive me home. They pack me up and drive me home because my boss had let me work from there. I never missed a paycheck last year. We figured out for me to work remotely. My IT guy from work and my boss were amazing. I never missed my paycheck last year. It was just another miracle of the Lord. But we had all that to pack up. I had a scanner. I had files. I had all kind of stuff down there. I pay our bills. I had our bills down there. So we had all that to pack up and move home. And I'm like, okay, do I pack up and move home? Or do I let this lease go? What do I do, Lord? And he led me. My first thought that he said to me was like, "Julie, you're going to move home. You're going to step out on faith." And I'm like, "Lord, what if I celebrate on Facebook? And then I have to turn around on Monday and tell them it's back. I didn't even make it out of radiation, and it's back." And he said to me, "Noah had to start building the ark before it started raining." And people thought he was crazy. And it's okay, Julie. And I literally felt like God said that out loud to me that night. That next morning, my husband was over there sleeping, snoring just a little bit, and I didn't wake him up. And I prayed some more, and I thought about Elijah and Ahab and the 450 prophets of Baal, where, you know, Elijah laid the wood down. He said, "Okay, Lord, you can You can even, we'll even pour water all over it. And if Bill can set this water on, sacrifice this altar on fire, then fine. But I think God's going to do it, and God burns it up, all this wet wood. And he is like, I want you to be that. I want you to be Elijah. I'm going to be there. So we did it. We packed everything up. I told him, I said, we're going to pack up. We're going to go home. We're going to celebrate. We made our videos. We rang the bell. We left. We got 3 hours up the road, and I got an email. It was radiation debris. It was radiation debris. And you're all clear, Miss Smith. And we'll see you again in May for your follow-ups. And I started to just weep. We literally praised the Lord right down the interstate. We had not told my parents. We had not told anybody but my pastor. We'd asked him to pray with us. We had not told our children because I didn't want them as terrified as I was. So we called them and we told all them how good the Lord was. As we rode up the interstate, we just celebrated with a lot of people. And that was another modern day miracle to me, that it was radiation debris and that I was able to step out and be.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the decision to pack up and go. I mean, that to me is indicative of faith. And you're right. There are several instances in Scripture where somebody had to take an action before God pulled the trigger on what he was going to do.
Absolutely.
And look foolish. Noah is probably chief among them, right? He looked like a real idiot building a boat in the middle of the desert. And not just to have a boat, but he basically said, hey, look, you guys, you don't believe this, but it's going to rain. It's going to rain so much that this boat is the only way that anybody is going to survive. But that happened in lots of other places in Scripture. I think of Abraham carrying Isaac, his son, to be sacrificed, and knowing that God would provide somehow, even though he didn't figure out a way for that to happen. There's several, and I even heard a story about it this week, the very same thing. But to step out in faith and actually make that decision, it's almost like thanking God in advance for answering that prayer.
Yes.
So you've gotten now through radiation. You're back home. We're probably getting into April now.
We're into April, and everything's going well, and we have a scan scheduled, my first scans, for follow-up in May. And I get a call from my daughter at the end of April, and she says, Mom, I went to my doctor today. We're expecting our first grandchild at this point. And Whitney says, Mom, I went to the doctor today, and she thinks that I am too small. So we've got a small for gestational age pregnancy going here. And she said, she's done some tests, and she's going to check my umbilical cord. She's not sure what's going on, and she's going to refer me to UAB. And I said, okay, so let's start praying. We can do this, babe. Let's pray. So we're praying, and she's freaking out, and I'm calm at this point. We're praying about it. And she calls me the next Thursday on her way to the appointment. Well, at some point during that week, she calls and says, okay, my UAB appointment is next Thursday, and so is my Tuscaloosa appointment. So she went to her Tuscaloosa appointment, and she called me, and she said, Mom, my blood pressure's up. And they think I'm something called preeclamptic. And so they told me they're letting UAB know, but I'm headed to UAB now. So my alarm is moving up. My nurseometer is tacking on up there now, as I call it. And so I said, okay, just as soon as y'all, just in case, Whitney, pack a bag. Just in case. You and Hunter pack a bag in case y'all need to spend the night. And we prayed for him over the phone, right then. I'm a firm believer in that now, too. You pray for somebody, then you pray for them. Not, I'm going to pray for you. You go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
So we prayed for him. I'm like, okay, you call me as soon as you hear something. So my husband gets off from work, and we go up to the track at our church, and we're walking. And the phone rings, and it's my son-in-law, and he says, hey, we're going to have a baby tonight. And I'm like, what? And he said, the doctors say there's something wrong with the umbilical cord, and he's not getting the nutrients that he needs, and we're going to have a baby tonight.
What's the due date?
The due date was June. In June, he was 33 weeks, so he's 7 weeks early. And this is May 1st. Or this is April the last day of April.
Yeah.
So we get in the car, we go home, we get to around the track, jump in the car, run home, run through the shower, pack everything up, and we head to Birmingham, and we literally fall apart. We both literally wept at this point. We're like, okay, we've made it through all this other stuff, but this is our baby. My daughter's the youngest. This is our baby, and this is her baby. And I, as a nurse, know everything that can be wrong at this point. I'm not sharing this information with anybody, but in my mind, I know everything that can be wrong. So we're weeping, and we're like, okay, we got to call people. So we start calling, everybody. We need you to pray. We're driving north, and we're calling everybody we can think of. And they're praying for us, and they're praying on the phone out loud with us. Our pastor prayed out loud with us. Our friend Brian prayed with us. Ron and Donna prayed with us. My brother and his wife, everybody's praying with us. My parents are freaking out, but they're praying with us. It's like we got all these people, and that's another thing. It's so important to have prayer warriors when you can't do it on your own. And it finally, most of the way up, we were pretty far up there when we were able to dry it up and start feeling a measure of resolve, like we can get through this. So we go to my son Drew's house, we pick up he and Megan, and we head to the hospital. Now, we know we can't go in. And that's hard for me, because when I picture my first grandson, my first grandchild, I'm the nurse. I'm going to get to be there. I'm going to get to see all this stuff. It's going to be all this, and I can be sure my baby's okay, my daughter's okay. I can take care of her while everybody's taking care of the baby. I can make sure the nurses are taking care of her right. I can make sure they're taking care of the baby right.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the
Grandma,
eyes watching them.
Right.
Grandma is going to be making sure all this is taken care
right.
of. Grandma is in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Praying. Drew and Megan and David and I parked in the parking lot at UAB, and we stayed till he was born. We got there probably about 10 o'clock, and we left there sometime after 2. And we'd get out and we'd walk circles with our mask on, because it was a mandate in the city of Birmingham that if you were outside a vehicle, you had to be in a mask. We'd walk circles around the car in the parking lot, and we would pray. And we prayed, and we prayed, and we prayed until he was born. And Hunter was fantastic about texting us to let us know what was going on in there. And finally, they made me leave before I could talk to Whitney, my daughter, to be sure she was okay. But he was born, and he was doing well. And for nurses, his APGAR was 8 and 9, which was really good. That was real impressive to me. That's the score when they're born. And I was like, okay, Lord, we're through the first hurdle. We're through the first hurdle. And then they were like, okay, Julie, we got to go home and sleep. Mom, we got to go home and sleep. So we go to Drew's house, who lives in Birmingham, which was a blessing as well. We go to his house, and when we get there, Hunter's able to FaceTime us and let me see Whitney.
Oh, wow.
Let me see Whitney. I can't see the baby, but I can see Whitney and know that she's okay, so I can go get some sleep. And that started a 52-day roller coaster in the NICU. Baylor was 2 pounds and 2 ounces, and he had a bilateral germinal matrix brain bleed along the way.
I don't know what that is.
I didn't either. He had a brain bleed. That's very common in the NICU. We are still watching that issue. It was a very mild. Apparently, that's something that premature babies have. And as of this week, we are still praying through that. There's still an issue there that maybe his head is a little too big. And there is a small place that's not closed between his ventricles that needs to close. So we're waiting to see a pediatric neurosurgeon. We think that they're going to say this is just something they're being vigilant about, and that's what we're praying about. But he was in the hospital, and it was a roller coaster. I'm a nurse, and the family that you're talking about, that's your friend, her sister-in-law is a NICU nurse in Mobile. I'm in another NICU all the time doing tube feeding patients in Mobile, and I know her, so I'm texting these people, and they're telling me, this is okay, this is not okay, he's too small today, he's too big tomorrow. It was just a roller coaster. We didn't anticipate that. But he got to come home on Father's Day. So 52 days later, on Father's Day.
Almost 2 months in the NICU.
Yes. And we couldn't see him. And Hunter and Whitney could go and stay during the day. And then one of them could stay at night. Now, my son and his wife, of course, opened up their home to us. My boss let me again work from home to go up there because he didn't want me to get COVID. he was having me work from home because he didn't want me to catch COVID from anybody also.
Right.
And he was like, you can do it from home, you can do it from Hoover. Go ahead. Go on up there. So I tried to like cook and help do laundry and just be there for my daughter because she'd had a C-section. Just take care of her at night when she was home and just be there for them and just pray for them. Just be there in prayer.
Yeah. Is that what dominated for you? Was it mostly immersion in prayer?
Yes. And Christian
And
radio,
music. Yeah.
singing to myself. If I wasn't praying, I was singing to myself or listening to my playlist. And Baylor was born on Thursday night, actually Friday morning. My first scan was at the Mayo on that Monday. So I had to leave them in the midst of all that and drive to the Mayo when he was 2 days old and have my scans. And I remember praying,
To Jacksonville.
Lord, I got to go have these scans. And I know that's the biggest thing. I got to be healthy to help take care of all them. But please don't put this on them. Please don't let it be back. And thankfully, my scan was clear. I have to have scans every 3 months, and it was clear. But it was really hard to leave again and drive down there and have a scan and then go back. Because I thought, I need to be strong, but I can't. The Lord had to be there for them. They grew as a family, and together, the husband and wife, my daughter and her husband, they had to depend on just the Lord also. They had been through a lot, but they had to depend on the Lord, and it's grown their faith as well.
Yeah, I would think also with this longevity studies, people that live to be centenarians, 100 years or more, there's a great book called Blue Zones. One of the studies, one of the factors that is most prominent in these pockets of people who live the longest is a sense of purpose. So it's diet, exercise, nothing crazy, just
right.
Movement. Spirituality is a piece of it, but one of the other critical factors is when you have a sense of purpose. These are cultures where the elderly are highly respected. They are the sort of the decision makers, and just because of their experience, probably more so than other pockets around the world. And I say that because I feel like part of this could have been your own treatment. You've been given you're in the throes of this really scary diagnosis that's going to change your life, and you don't know if it's back at any time, and so that's kind of hovering over you.
Right.
But suddenly you're thrown into this thing where you've been given this great sense of purpose for your daughter and your grandson, and I think you spring into action as you've described.
Yes.
And I can't help but think that would play a role in your own healing and your own body doing the things it needs to do to continue to battle your own disease and challenge that you have in
Yes.
the time. You see where I'm going with that?
I do.
And I can see that playing a role in this for you.
Yes.
And God makes those things inside of us. He designed things to work in a certain way. And it seems like the timing of that would be just the worst timing. But in a sense, I can see how the timing of that might be like the best timing. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does.
I don't know.
Thank you.
I don't know.
That puts it in perspective also. The 4th of July weekend, my husband came in, and it was just the week before the 4th of July weekend. I was ventilating about something at work. You know how women are. We like to talk about things 58 times.
I don't know what you're talking about.
A man wants to fix it in one conversation, and we want to talk about it 58 times.
My wife's going to listen to this,
Yeah.
and I just don't even understand what.
And I was whining / ventilating / complaining. And I looked, and I just realized something was different about his face. And I stopped, and I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I got something to tell you." And my heart just plummeted. I said, "What?" And he said, "I got laid off today." Well, my husband has been at the same job. We both have. We both changed jobs 26 years ago. And so we're 25 years into a job. And he said the whole mill is shut down because of COVID. He worked at our paper plant and paper mill in Jackson. And he said, it's only supposed to last till September 1st. And I said, well. So I stood there, and my first thought was, a man's work is so much a part of his identity. And I need to say something. And I really felt it. I looked at him, and I reached over, and I put my arms around him, and I laid my forehead against his, and I said, well, we're going to pray about it. I said, but you know what? I'm alive, and Baylor's alive, and we've been through worse this year. And this is just a bump in the road. We'll be fine. It's going to be okay. God has got us through worse. And he said, you're right. And so we prayed. We stood right then and we prayed out loud. We took turns. And just a few days later, he got a call about a shutdown that he could work in Demopolis. And he went up there and he worked that shutdown. And then he got a call from the plant that they needed some people to work a travel team in the PCA plant in DeRidder, Louisiana. So he got the opportunity to go over there to work. Well, that was not like the greatest solution, but we were able to pay our insurance. We didn't have to pay our insurance. We didn't have to go to Cobra. So if you don't understand the insurance world, if you're laid off from your job, you can keep your insurance, but you have to pay your part and the company's part. And that would be a huge financial burden for us. Even with me working, with him being laid off and drawing unemployment, that would be huge.
So is this the same company?
Yes. It's the
So
same
he's able
company.
to stay within the company.
Yes, within the company and do this
keep
travel
the
team.
insurance.
Yes. Yes.
Well, that's a blessing for
Yes.
sure.
So he was gone during the week, so I was home fighting fear, fighting spiritual warfare, because when you're by yourself, that's when Satan tries to get you. And learning to be by myself, because we're a very close couple, learning to be by myself and deal with fear and immunotherapy and making sure Baylor's okay and everything else. And he's home on the weekends, and learning that's a blessing. Again, the Lord wanted me to depend just on him, because I'm bad about turning to David first and not the Lord.
Yeah.
And God wants me to turn to him first. No matter if he did give me a good Christian husband, he wants me to turn to him first. And it's got to be about him and
That's
not
right.
about us.
There's a partner, but then there's God.
Yes. And that's something that I have struggled with a bit during our marriage. And this year I struggled with that. But we were able to make it through that. And we did fine financially. The Lord took care of us. So we're just blessed, just absolutely blessed. And so then we're sliding along, and we go into September, and the next big hurdle hits. And that's, we come to Birmingham, and my husband gets up that next morning. He's not really feeling well. And he tells my son, he says, I'm just kind of feeling sinusy. And my son works for urgent cares. He's a director of billing for an urgent care chain of urgent cares all across the state and now in Georgia. And so he said, well, let me run you to one of the main streets and we'll get you tested. But Dad, I don't think you have it. I don't think you have COVID. And he said, well, I think, we just better be safe, because we were going to go back, and he was going to keep Baylor the next week since he was laid off. He was going to keep Baylor at home. And I was going to drop him off and go on back home and work. And he had COVID, and he called me, and he broke. He said, I've got COVID. I'm positive, and I'm going to give it to you. And you can't come home with me. You're going to have to stay up here. And I said, I started packing.
Wow. So your husband tested positive, and you guys came back. When did you test?
We came back. We're walking a little bit every day, pushing, trying to take all these vitamins everybody tells you to take. That was on Saturday. On Wednesday morning, I woke up, and I thought, I've got a temperature. And I went and got the thermometer, and I did. I had a temperature of 101.3. And it's 7 o'clock in the morning. So I text my primary care physician, and I told her, I had put them on alert. And I said, I got a temp of 101.3. She said, get your butt over here. I said, okay. So we get ready and we go over, and I call them from the parking lot and tell them I'm there. They call me in. My primary care physicians, Dr. Donald and Dr. Carpenter, work together. They're partners in Chatham. And I'm on the hospital board there, so we're all friends. And they take amazing care of my whole family. And they had me tested, and he came back in. They both came back in, and they were like, Dr. Donald looked at me, and he said, Julie, you're positive. And I said, I will. And I looked at him, and I had to think about it for a second, and I said, well, God is bigger. He said, well, that may be so. He said, but you're the perfect storm. He said, I got to get you to Mobile somewhere where where there's a ventilator right down the hall from you. Because on day 3 or day 7, you're going to go on a ventilator. He said, I got to get you out of here. And he said, what can we do? And I said, well, I've made friends with this nurse practitioner. I've been talking to her all the time because of my boss. And so I called her and she answered the phone. And I said, hey, Katie, this is Miss Julie. I just tested positive for COVID. She's like, oh, crap. How soon can you get here? I said, can you get me into Dr. Percy? She said, yes, you get down here. So then we're like, okay, we call a nurse friend who is the ER manager at the Mobile Infirmary in Saraland. And she answers her phone right off. Another miracle. And I say, Amanda, they want to direct admit me. They want to get me to Dr. Percy. Can you help that happen? Oh, yeah, I'll make that happen. We'll make that happen. So my husband drives me down there and drops me off, thinking that on day 3 or day 7, I'm going to go on a ventilator. And in my mind, this is September the 30th, and my boss has already been on a ventilator since somewhere around August the 22nd or so. He went in the hospital on the 15th, and he went on a ventilator within a week. And so I'm like, I'm going to die by myself. I'm going to die in a hospital room by myself. It's so hard for my husband to drop me off and wait in the parking lot. So much of 2020 we spent praying in parking lots. So when I finally got my CT scan and got admitted and got on the COVID floor, I told him, I said, I'm up here and you need to go on home. Well, he's isolated and quarantined at home alone. And I'm quarantined alone in a hospital room in a little prison cell because you can't go outside in the hall. You can't do anything.
Right.
So I think at that point, faith kicked in again. And I just cried out to God, Lord, here I am. And basically, I really feel like he said to me, I didn't bring you this far to drop you now. You've been through so much this year, and we're going to get through this. And I was scared every minute that the next minute was going to be when I had to go on a ventilator. But day 3 came and went, and day 5, I left the hospital after the 5 days of remdesivir, and I never had to progress past just oxygen by a nasal cannula, just little tubes in your nose.
Why did he think you were going to be on a ventilator?
My pre-existing lung condition was there, and my entire left lung was full of pneumonia.
Oh, really?
My chest x-ray was terrible. And he was like, okay.
So he saw that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Medically, I was the perfect storm.
So you had pneumonia.
Yes. I had
with your conditions.
Major pneumonia, and we knew at this point that the immunotherapy had regressed my lung condition 9%. And then I got COVID. So he's like, we're working with nothing here. And I said, well, God is bigger.
Yeah, and I think knowing you also as an active person, you talk about high-intensity training, and, I think you've been active your whole life.
Yes.
And athletic and sports and stuff like that. I believe that plays a factor in our ability to fight that stuff off.
It does.
I feel like this is... God must necessarily exist outside of the way we see time, for instance. Right? We see time as linear or going down a path. God, who created time, has to exist so that he can see it all at one time. So I believe he answers prayers before we ask them, meaning we would ask a prayer for your safety and for him to deliver you from COVID and what they think could happen based on your situation. I believe he begins to answer that prayer long before. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. That makes perfect sense.
Sometimes I pray for things or about things that in our time have already happened because I know that God is above time.
Right, and he's already preparing that way.
I believe that. Yeah. And that sounds crazy. It's like that's a futile effort
that's
or
kind
whatever.
of an epiphany. That's amazing.
But I see it that way sometimes, and so I pray for people that are deceased, and that God turn their heart. And I believe he answers those prayers.
Yes.
And it sounds like I can see that being a way that would be answered for you.
Yes. The hardest part of COVID is the isolation. I think my boss is struggling with that today. I don't think he would mind me saying that. I'm praying for him because he's back in the hospital right now with another complication. And that kind of goes back to the podcast that I listened to about the demon possession and the spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
Leading into this week, coming here for this podcast, things were happening to make me sway again, maybe my faith, to distract me from praying over this.
Really? What? Tell me about that.
Things like Baylor went back to the doctor, and they've done another test, and we still have this issue that they're watching. And so now we're in a 2-week window of waiting on a referral to UAB for this neurosurgeon to be told whether, okay, we're just going to be vigilant or something's going on. My boss had to go back in the hospital. He's got some complications. He's a long hauler from the COVID. And, it's irritations at work, just things, uncertainties at work. And I'm like, God has brought us through all this. And I've got something big coming up, and Satan's trying to distract me from it. He's trying to distract me.
That is legitimate, and that is real. And people, the spiritual life is real, and I believe that so strongly. And when you stop and take note of things like that and understand what is going on there, rather than just being swung by the tail in whichever direction it swings you, and say, whoa, I know what's going on here. I'm about to do something for the kingdom, and the enemy is trying to stop me.
He doesn't like it.
That's right. We have to realize that life is very spiritual. And when I hear you talk about each thing through this story, there are lots of things that I think the casual observer would say, that's not a miracle, that's just a coincidence. What would you say to somebody that said that?
Medically, it's a miracle. Medically, as a nurse, I have no doubt it's a miracle. My doctor has no doubt it's a miracle. I had to go back and see my urologist as a sideline of the major surgery that I had that affected my bladder. And she looked at me and she said, you're a miracle. I said, yes, I do. And she said, that you're the only person I know that a hemorrhoid saved their life. I said, yes, I do. I realize that. I don't know why. I don't deserve it. I thought that I was good at everything. I guess my takeaway, you asked me on this, was, okay, I can exercise really hard, and I can work really hard, and I can do this at church, and I've got this, and I've got this, and I've got that. And God took away every bit of that last year. Every bit of it. Where all I had, I'm a doer. I'm a list maker. I'm a doer. And God took away all that. He said, it's just about being. It's just about me. And it's not about anything you can do. There's nothing you can do. It has to come from me. And that's what I learned. That was my takeaway. Yeah, that's a big part of it.
It is. And people don't like that. People don't. I
didn't like it.
People don't like that because it feels like I think it feels like they're losing their own ability to. I don't know, control is the right word. Probably is control, but I think it maybe they feel like it takes away their own freedom a little bit.
The trade-off was, like I said, that it's going to happen anyway. Those things are going to happen, whether the Lord is with you or not. But the trade-off is, He sent me a girl that knew where Leroy was. My melanoma specialist is married to a woman from Mobile. We talk about Northport. The guy that did my, he went to, actually, not him, I'm sorry, my melanoma doctor went to school with Mac Jones, so we talk about Alabama football. Or didn't go to school with Mac Jones and went to the same school Mac Jones went to. So, but the man that did, the surgeon that did my biopsy, I had one other time that something showed up on my scan, and he did the 4-week biopsy when I during my radiation. He went in to do the biopsy, and he's the one that found the radiation debris. The guy that found that was actually from Northport originally, or went to school here and lived in Northport. So we were able to talk about different things around Tuscaloosa and around Northport, which made me comfortable. Again, God was with us every single step. It's crazy.
And when you look at that from a spiritual perspective, it very much can feel like in some of the moments when you feel most exposed, most threatened, just those bits of comfort,
just a little bit,
remind you that He is with you
yes.
in these places.
Yes. And don't think that I've been just great, because, I mean, I've had my little, oh man, I remember one day I was on my way to work, and it's a 50-minute commute, and I just had a full out meltdown. For some reason, there was a memory. I was at a red light, and my phone did something. I picked it up, and I looked on Facebook because I'm sitting at a red light, and I'm waiting on the train. And it's a memory from working out in one of my workout classes. It's a real good picture of my husband and I at one of our workout classes. And I just cried. I was like, Lord, I don't want this colostomy. I don't want this bag. It's not, most people don't know it but me, but still, I don't want this. I want to be able to do whatever I want. I want to be able to be more spontaneous. Lord, I don't want to be, I'll be honest with you. I don't even like to say I have an oncologist. I'd rather say I have a melanoma doctor.
Yeah.
Because it just sounds better.
Yeah.
I'm crazy like that, and I just had a meltdown, and the Lord told me, it's like I want to go back to that person 3 years ago. I want to be her. And the Lord said, you know what? Nobody is the same person they were 3 years ago. I am going to be faithful and just to complete what I started in you. And the new person will be okay. The new person can be used, and the new person will be fine too, bag and all. The new person, you're a new creation, Julie. It's okay. You can't be the old person anymore, but that's not to say that one day the new person won't be better. And you asked me, you emailed me and said, when hearing of this story, one can't help but think of the story of the overwhelming misfortune of Job. Satan believed that given the right circumstances, Job would curse God for his misfortune. And you asked me how I thought about that. And yes, I brought this little card because right after I got diagnosed, I had these neon cards, and I wrote some verses on them. And I really believed that the Lord was already kind of doing a Job thing in me. And so this was what I clung to and what I wrote down, and I kept on my kitchen cabinet, and I read every morning when I took my medicine. It said, Job 42:12 says, so the Lord blessed Job the second half of his life even more than the beginning. And in verse 13 it says, and then he died, an old man who had lived a long, full life. And so I thought, okay, my younger days are gone, but God has promised that if I'll just stay strong to him, the second half of my life can be even better. So I clung to that part of the story and tried not to drown in the middle parts of the story.
That's amazing, and it is true. And what a wonderful piece of scripture to be led to in that time. So often when things happen that are not just unfortunate or inconvenient, but catastrophic.
Yes.
We sometimes sit in ashes and loathe and self-pity and justifiably so. I mean, gosh, this could be a death sentence, right? This baby may not survive. I might not get through this bout with COVID. My husband might not get his job back.
Right.
We could lose all our benefits. And, a lot of people naturally have this woe is me. And Job had it too. He was mired in that. At no point, though, did he never curses God. And because of that, because he remained faithful, even though he had, if you've read Job, it's not just the story of this misfortune, then all of a sudden it turns into, it's okay at the end. It is, but there's like
a lot
40 chapters of
Yes.
this dialogue between him and these three friends that are bickering back and forth.
And his wife.
Yeah. So, but when I think of it, it's the misfortune that we focus on, and the why me, and take this from me, and let's make my life perfect the way that I want it to be. I think of when you talk about the colostomy, especially, and the thorn in your side.
Yeah, I've thought that.
That is when Paul
Yeah.
talks about his own thorn that he's asked God to remove several times. And, of course, God's response is, my grace is sufficient for you. And, of course, Paul lived a mighty life, and his efforts and letters and are still some of our greatest teachings today. I mean, all that happened after he was given whatever that thorn in his side. We don't know what it was, right? It was some sort of hindrance. But I can't help but think that somehow that thorn wasn't just something he had to endure, but ultimately was something that propelled him to be a better servant of God.
Yeah, I wasn't going to talk about my colostomy. I wasn't going to tell anybody I had one. And the Saturday before I had my surgery, we were going to Mobile, and I was just sitting there flipping through Instagram, and I came across something about an ostomy patient. And so I you kind of fall down a rabbit hole on Instagram, but this was a good rabbit hole. And I started looking at these hashtags, and I followed these hashtags, and I looked at all these people that were willing to show that they were working out, show their body, show how they were dressed, show, even, in workout shirt and just a workout bra and tights, which I would never do to the world. But, just be in shorts, men in shorts, and men exercising and running marathons and doing things. And I thought, and I literally cried, and I thought, Lord, I'm being vain. I'm being vain. These people that I do not know, that do not know me, will never know me, I have been encouraged by. And I need to be honest, and I need to share my story and not hide that from people. I need to say, I have a colostomy and I'm making the best I can do with it, with life. We're just doing it. So I named her Petunia. And Petunia and I are kind of stuck together. And I laughed to keep from crying. And next Saturday, I'm going to do a rump shaker run in Birmingham, which I'm going to walk it because of my interstitial problems. But I'm able to exercise again. I've not had any problems with my colostomy exercising. My husband and I are both working out 4 days a week again. The Lord has brought us back to that point, and that's a miracle in itself. And we're going to be team no buts about it because God is good. No buts about it, all puns intended. And we are going to do the colostomy awareness walk as a family next Saturday. And I just feel like, I had to go and be transparent and tell people. And I did not do that till the day before my surgery, quite frankly. And I cried for a long time. It took me an hour and a half to make that post and admit that to the world. But I talk about Petunia and I laugh about her and I say, she's my best friend because she's stuck there with me and she saved my life. And that's what I have to remember. I can't remember the times that she's a little pig and she gives me, she just deals me misery sometimes. But, you have to shift your thinking. I had to ask God to change my thinking when I drove up to the Mayo of a panic attack to God, this is a place of hope. This is a place of miracles. This is a place of great knowledge. And God has changed. I don't panic when I drive up to the Mayo now. And I literally had to ask God to change my thinking. And I had to ask him to change my thinking about the ostomy. And Petunia's my friend now. She's just a part of me. And she's part of my story. And it just is what it is. And hopefully that makes somebody else out there feel better. So it encourages somebody.
Well, yeah. And our first thought when life changes away from what we know and love and are familiar with is this oh crap moment.
Yeah. Especially with the colostomy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
But it sounds like you've gotten to the point where you understand, and I think that's what people that come on to this podcast do, is they understand that my story and the things that happen to me not only are given to me to draw me closer to God and to shape my faith and to grow me in relationship with God, but they are also given to me to share with others.
Yes.
So that when people are given a diagnosis or are given the news of a colostomy or have a child or grandchild that's going to be in the condition that they're in or whatever it is, you are now in position to be the light of the world.
Absolutely. And I take that responsibility very seriously. When I tell people I'm going to pray for them anymore, I never realized what a gift that was, honestly, until I needed prayer, till it meant my life was hanging in the balance. And I needed to know that people were really praying for me. So, and I don't say this to pat myself on the back. I say this out of all sincerity. When people ask me to pray for them now, I write their name down. I have a notebook, and I write their name down. And I have that 50-minute commute. And as I drive down Highway 43 every morning at 6 a.m. headed to work, I'm glancing over at my notebook, reminding myself who I need to pray for. And if I wake up at 3 a.m., which is pretty common at this age. And I wake up at 3 a.m., I'm visualizing my list. Okay, this is my folks that are fighting cancer. This is my widow and widowers that, are trying to do life by themselves for the first time. This is my prodigals that their parents have asked me to pray for them. These are social situations that, are going on. This is things that are going on at church that the Lord needs to work out for his glory. I try to write those down, and I try to text that person, set that alarm, text that person on that doctor's appointment day, mail those cards. I keep cards all the time now, mail those cards. That so many days, it was just the day that I needed it, that David came in with the mail, and there was a card to me that said just what I needed it to say. Be the instrument of God. Mail those cards, encourage people. Surround yourself with friends that pray. Have people that you can call on that'll pray for you like that. Listen to Christian music. Surround yourself with Christian music. I'm so glad that I was born in a time. I love hymns, but I like Lecrae. If you don't know who that is, that's a Christian rapper. I like all kind of Christian music, and I like contemporary Christian music. And I love that I can sing all these things. When I can't think of the scriptures, I can sing the song that relates to the scripture. And of all the things, this has changed not just me, it's changed my whole family. My son is more compassionate. He's stronger. He's quicker to help people. I see that in him. My husband is more compassionate. We all are, stronger and quicker to help people, to be there for folks, to be intentional. I've watched my husband call people in our church that had COVID. We've delivered the vitamins to them, since they couldn't get out. We understand that quarantine and how hard it is, just those things. It changed us all. I know it sounds like such a cliche, but I don't take anything for granted. When I hold my grandson, I pray for him, and I pray, Lord, most everybody's grandmother's a testimony in their life, and I want to be a part of Baylor's testimony and my future grandchildren. I don't waste, when I hold him, I know what a miracle it is for me and him, and I thank God for he and I to be here in this moment, even today before I came over here. Lord, be with Baylor. Thank you for this moment. I find myself just enjoying the little moments. A walk in the sunshine. My husband and I like to go walking even on our non-workout days, and a walk on a beautiful day. Just thank you, God, we're together. He still loves me. He didn't run screaming for the hills when I had to have a colostomy. It's those things. I just don't take anything for granted anymore. And just, like I said, just being there for people. Just knowing how important, and understanding now how important it is to not be too busy to reach out to people. Because I would have these I want to do something for so-and-so. I want to do something for so-and-so. And I would think about it, but I would get busy at work, or I'd get busy at church, and that would just fall apart. And it's crazy that the world shut down. The whole world shut down the whole day. That same day, my whole world shut down. And I honestly, this is just my personal belief, is that this is a modern day judgment of God to remind us of our priorities 2020. And I personally don't want any of mine to be wasted. I don't want any of last year to be wasted. I want to have learned a lesson from it, and to use it and try to use it well, if that makes any sense.
It does. You've been given so many things. At some point you would think you would want to pull your hair out and say, why is this going? Why me? What is going on here? And when I hear your story and hear you describe it, you were pretty strong spiritually before.
Yeah.
I feel like this has seasoned you in a new way, and in a stronger way.
I kind of told my mom one day, I remember calling her when we were going through something with my son when he was in college, and even then it was preparing me for the worst things that happen to you can be the best things that happen to you. And I remember telling her the song Oceans came out then. And I can remember telling her, I'm doing okay, but it's like standing in the, we talked about going to the beach. It's like standing in the ocean, and you have your back to the waves, and you're talking to your family or friends, and that rogue wave comes along and smacks you under and kind of scuffs you up on the sand a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't expect it. And then but you get back up and you breathe and you get your feet under you. And that's kind of the way Satan hits you. It knocks you down, but you just got to stand up, and you got to get the sand out and shake it off, and you just got to breathe.
Yeah, how do you feel like you're different from 18, 16 months ago to now?
I'm so much more empathetic, and I'm so much more in tune to thanking God for every little thing, really seriously. And like last week, things that happened at work that I could freak out about, like, in the grand scheme of things, this is nothing. God's going to take care of this. And if he doesn't, then he'll provide for me some other way. It really just puts things in perspective. Being irritated, there are relationships that are healed in my life that I specifically prayed about before my diagnosis that I didn't know how to fix, that are fixed now, because it really just kind of put that conflict into the nothing that it was.
Yeah, that is a powerful spiritual truth. I feel like we get so consumed with the minutia of day-to-day stuff and things that seem like they're so important to us. And if life is truly eternal, and Christians certainly believe that it is, that's one of the primary things that Jesus is the good news, right? Is that life is eternal and you can live it with him. It amazes me at the things that we prioritize and the significance with which we put on small things when you step back and look at eternal life. You say, really? Was that so important? Certainly not. And you're getting a chance to see it from a different perspective now. I mean, you've had a couple of times in the last year that you didn't know if you were going to be alive at this time.
I didn't.
And that sure helps minimize.
It puts it all in perspective.
What do we got to do to realize that without a death sentence?
I sure hope somebody can learn it from my story and they don't have to go through what I did. And that being said, it could be so much worse. I listened to one of your podcasts on the way up here, and with someone else, and I look at other people's stories, and they have it way worse than I did. And I wasn't that throwing up person that lost all my hair sick with chemo. Yeah, I coughed, and yeah, I fractured some ribs, but hey, I didn't have to go in the hospital for it. I didn't. I got the prednisone face now, but hey, that's okay. It's all right. I never lost my hair. I didn't throw up everywhere. I didn't have to have a feeding tube to get built back up like so many of my patients that I see. I mean, it could be so much worse.
Gratitude.
Yes.
In the face of a really hard situation.
Yes.
I think that's a game changer. I think God designed it that way. I'm certain that God designed it in such a way that if we could have a heart of gratitude in the face of adversity, not just, I got to make it through the adversity, but a heart of gratitude in the face of that is one of the healing factors that goes into anyone's battle with some sort of severe diagnosis or condition.
Yes.
I believe that. I think that's just how it's designed to work. He tells us not to worry. I think worry is one of the things that kills us.
That's the hardest thing to do, is that you have to fight that battle or you get so stuck in the worry.
Yeah, and I think worry is one of our biggest sources of terminal illness. I think some of it springs directly, cancers spring directly from.
The fear is the worst part.
Yeah.
I talk to people fighting it every day. The fear is the worst part.
So how would you coach someone who is battling that? How do you coach someone out of the worry and fear?
It's just that same thing that I say, that the first time that you feel that first thought, you have to take your thoughts captive. You have to renew your thoughts every day, like the Bible says. We're renewing our mind and renewing our thoughts every day. And you have to take that thought captive. And I just say it out loud, like, Satan, get away from me. No, I can't do this. I cannot do this. It may happen, but I'm not going to worry about it, because I'm losing today worrying about tomorrow. So I'm just like, okay, Lord, you can help me think. And I'll just start singing, even if it's Jesus, Jesus, there's just something about that name. Or just speaking his name, or singing it, or singing, I'm going to see a victory, or Peace Be Still by Hope Darst. That's one of the songs God gave me during that 4 week that Whitney sent me. My daughter sent me one morning while I was getting ready to go to radiation. She's like, oh, I'm listening to this song, and it was so good. Just because I hear the storm doesn't mean I want to be afraid of it. Lord, help me not to fear. Just because I hear the storm, help me not to be afraid of it. But, God really can change your thinking. He changed my thinking about approaching the Mayo. He changes my thinking about worrying.
People don't believe that.
He can do that. He does that for me.
People don't believe that.
Real.
People think they are who they are. That's just who I am. People say that.
I was a worrier. I'm like my mom. Before this, I worried if I didn't have anything to worry about. Something's fixing to happen.
Some people think that that's some sort of badge of honor.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just a worrier. I'm supposed to worry. And you're saying that's a crock.
Yeah. You got to decide whether you want to be a patient or whether you don't. Do you want to be healed or do you not?
It's interesting when you say, do you want to be healed or do you not? Blind man on the road yelled out for Jesus, and Jesus was like, he didn't just say, hey, I'm going to heal your sight. He said, what do you want me to do for you? The guy was blind. And Jesus said, what do you want me to do for you? You would think he would say, well, duh. But he didn't. He knew that the guy needed to say what it is he wanted. He could have said, if you could just get somebody to bring food over for me, because I can't see.
Yeah.
Or how about a walking stick? Wouldn't a walking stick be good? What do you want me to do for you? You got to decide what you want me to do for you. I can do anything. And if you have faith in me that I can do anything, that's a big step for you. But you got to decide what you want me to do for you. And he said, Master, I want to see. He could have said anything he wanted. He could have said the walking stick, or give me a dog that can walk me around, or whatever else it was. He said, I want to see. And he gave him his sight. And that's what you had to do. It sounds like you had to say, what do I want here? Do I want pity?
Right.
Or do I want to be healed?
Do I want to be strong?
Yeah.
And if I want to be normal, I want to be normal. That means when people ask me I'm okay. I'm great. I told somebody today, I'm fine as frog hair. My papa used to say, fine as frog hair. You don't want to say, well, I don't feel that. I feel this way. I feel this way. I feel this way. I feel great. Because I do. Well, that didn't get you any attention. Well, that's okay. Because the attention is what God did. And he gets the attention. That's all that matters.
Isn't that right, though? Doesn't it feel like if I want the pity party for myself, that it's that I want to draw attention to myself?
Yeah. And
when we ask God to heal us, we then are reflecting or diverting that and saying, don't give me the attention, give it to him.
Yes. And I need to be serving. What I need to be doing is going and serving now. I need to be, I don't need to be the one getting and receiving. It's my turn to give.
Those are spiritual truths. They are, and we fight against that. There's something in us that wants that attention.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but it is not attractive.
No.
When you see other people doing it, it's like, come on, man. Come on. I see that, and I find myself doing it sometimes. I'm like, come on, man, what is that? Are you trying to get attention? Are you trying to let people know your thing so that you can get attention? And when we discover what you're talking about and become an instrument for God rather than for ourselves, I don't know. I think we're in a better place spiritually, and I think we're a lot closer to healing and him than the other way.
Yeah. And I can't do anything, no matter how good I try to be, no matter how much I try to serve, no matter how much I teach Sunday school, no matter, there's been 33 years that I've taught Sunday school, vacation Bible school every year except a couple, all my kids' lives. That doesn't matter. Adversity still comes to me. Cancer still came after me. It may still get me, but right now I'm healed and I'm standing on it, and I'm excited about it. No matter what I did, it didn't make me special. Cancer is no respecter. No matter how proud I am of my daughter and what a great young Christian she is and is growing to be. She still had a baby in the NICU. The last person you would ever expect to be preeclamptic. Those things come after you. Our pedigrees get us nowhere, like you said. And I don't know why I survived. I don't know why God healed me. I lost a very special friend during this, a very special friend that I prayed for so hard. If prayer could heal, if my prayers could have healed her, they would. And she won her battle with cancer, but she wanted to go to heaven. And that's hard. It's hard surviving when you lose people along the way too. People that are out there that have had cancer know how that survivor guilt feels.
So, based on all of these things that you've experienced and the person that you feel like you are now versus who you were then, I feel like you've got a new start.
Yeah.
In a new direction.
It was worth it. To be where I am now, everything that I went through was worth it. We're all alive, so it was all worth it.
What have you learned? What is the message that you would give to others about the way God operates, the way He worked around with you, and the message, I guess, that you would give to others based on your experience? They're getting a front row seat to Julie Smith's life, especially the condensed version of the last 16, 18 months. What is the thing that you take away from that and say, if I could express to you this is what it would be?
Keep moving. Keep walking. Keep breathing. Keep praying. Keep the faith. Don't stop and give up. Just believe and pray and trust God that even if it turns out completely the way you don't want it to, that He's going to take care of you and He will show up. If He tells you something, believe Him.
What did He tell you?
He told me to step out on faith. Step out on faith and celebrate your healing, not knowing you're healed at this point. Step out there and do it.
To hear you talk now, it sounds like you've just gained a seasoning that has given you much more confidence spiritually.
Yes.
You've taken these experiences, built something inside of you that you then in turn are giving. And I think that's what God does. I don't think it's evident that that's what He has done throughout all of history, is He gives people gifts. They may be obvious gifts like the ability to speak or teach like you have. It might be just a nurturing temperament. It might be the gift of cancer, as odd as that sounds. But whatever He gives us, I think He expects us to multiply it for His good, right? Is to take those talents and then give the fruit of that away.
I hope I can do that.
You're already doing it. You're doing it in other places. You're here today. You're
sharing. It's about Him,
That's right.
Because I didn't do any of this. God did it.
That's right. And you can't help but tell that.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you're here today. That's what you told me anyway.
Absolutely.
I believe you.
Absolutely.
So what an extraordinary story, and what a powerful set of takeaways if you can drill into some of the spiritual truths that you've discovered along the way and that you've shared about the way God actually works and how He's worked in your life and how He's changed you. And you're not a changed person from somebody who didn't have faith, that was given a set of circumstances that caused you to gain faith. You were a person of very strong faith to start with. You've just been seasoned in a new way. All those things, as you had a strong faith that you built on, your own strong-willed personality, your active lifestyle, and all these other things that you grew accustomed to in your life. God says, hey, I tell you what, I think you've grown in your faith to the point where we can change that, and you can depend on me. in the areas that maybe you weren't as much as before. Boy, it feels like climbing under that wing of his a little bit deeper is a good feeling, right?
It is.
That's how I view that. I don't view that as a loss of my own freedom. I feel like it's like when my 4-year-old comes up and he sits on the couch next to me. That's one thing. But when he works his way in and kind of snuggles up under that arm, and I got him in about as tight as I can get him, that's kind of how I view this. And when we get dealt adversity, if we'll just like snuggle on in a little bit closer, boy, what a comfortable place that is.
Absolutely.
No matter what burden we're carrying along.
Absolutely.
Because he's right. He's like not only carrying the burden, but us too. I don't know. That's how I see it. And I see it in the way that you tell your story, and I see it in the things that you're doing already. I mean, heck, we're just starting 2021. It's been just slightly over a year since all of this started.
Yeah.
And you're flying out tomorrow for a family trip, and you're participating in a charity run walk next weekend. And
I just was blown away yesterday when I realized when you sent me that text and you said, here's some other things I forgot, and you said that about miracles. I was blown away when God reminded me that it was 1 year ago today that I was driving into such uncertainty. And today I have lived to tell about it and give my testimony and thank him. 1 year ago today, how things change. I'm just blown away by that because we didn't know when this date was going to fall.
No, that's right. And that's how God doesn't, I don't believe he does these things so that we just understand one thing that turns from it. I think you'll find things that happen throughout the rest of your life. They'll be like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That was another thing he was doing back then.
Yes.
I didn't even notice it, right?
Yes.
And so many things, it's this ripple effect that we'll never see all of.
Well, thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for having me, and thank you for the podcast that I've listened to because they are amazing, and I'm enjoying them so much.
Well, Julie, that is a kind thing for you to say. And, the challenge often is getting people that are willing to share their stories and their faith-shaping experiences. And I've said it on every one, and I say it on this one just as much. The blessing is mine to be able to sit across the table and discuss how God works in our lives and the things that you've discovered in your own set of circumstances and adversity. And I just love being able to sit here and participate in that discussion with you and to sort of be in the presence of people who have walked through the valley of the shadow of death.
Absolutely.
And just kind of participate in whatever distant way that I am. So I appreciate you. I mean, making the time and driving the distance to come up here specifically to share so that your story could impact the lives of others is just a very powerful testament to your approach to the adversity/gifts that God has given you and how you want to take those and turn them into good for other people. And so the appreciation is mine for you, and I just love that you're here, and I always get to make new friends in the process, and so here we are. So I can't thank you enough, and I look forward to watching your hope flourish. Julie Smith has become a new person by having to trust God in ways she never had to before. When presented with her worst fears, Julie had to make a decision. Do I want to be healed or not? Am I truly going to trust God, or is that just something I say? Julie's decision to trust God, to demonstrate gratitude in the most difficult of situations, and to serve Christ with all of her gifts, both the good and the difficult, is an example all of us should look to emulate. God bless Julie Smith. Thank you for joining us today on A Stronger Faith. If you want to help us, consider sharing your own faith-shaping experience or connecting us to someone with a great faith-shaping story. You can do that with a simple email to connect@astrongerfaith.com or with a message on Facebook or Instagram. You can also help us by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite player. Good reviews and ratings help these stories reach more people, And that's exactly what we pray God does with these stories. Until next time, I pray for peace and a stronger faith for you and those you love.